What is going on, my fellow Pokemon TCG enjoyers? I am joined today by a man who needs no introduction. I'm here with the king of Pokemon YouTube, Mr. Little Dark Fury, also known as Matt Wood. Matt, thanks so much for coming on today. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I've watched all your videos and like I listen to your podcast all the time. So I'm like a big fan of the channel. So it's pretty cool. And I'm glad that you invited me on. So big shout out to you for that. But yeah, no. Obviously I'm Lil Dark Fury. If you don't know who I am, I do have a big YouTube channel where I post mostly like rogues and memes and stuff like that. But I do have a second channel that I do gear towards competitive content. But I'm mostly known to play the rogue decks and all like the fun stuff. And I think today we have like a bit of a funner kind of episode.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm also a big fan, Matt. I think you bring a lot of fun to the game. I think today's episode is going to be great because
Thanks.
I think we're gonna blend that fun and competitiveness because you did play a deck I think is really fun. Like some people think is more of like a meme deck, but you got to top 32 at Knoxville with the Gholdengo EX. So we're going to break that down today, go through your list, just go over some general questions and all the matchups. So why don't we just like dive right in? I wanted to start with your list. Your list I think is kind of standardized. It's been following what we've seen as a trend for Gholdengo. It's kind of like incorporated like this Palkia here. So I kind of wanted to start here. Why are you playing Palkia? Because Gholdengo is like a metal type, he uses metal energy. So like, why is Palkia in the deck?
Yeah, so Palkia is really, really good. It's just a very strong and efficient attacker. It can power itself up. It punishes your opponent for benching Pokemon, which I think is like one of the key things with it. It's a really good early game attacker because in the early game, you're playing its deck with like Battle VIP Pass, and they'll fill their bench up really easily. And then a lot of the time, you can kind of go off with Palkia Vstar and take like an easy two prize lead on your opponent, especially in like matchups against like Roaring Moon, Giratina, Miraidon. You can just like kind of play aggressive with Palkia early on in the game. It's a very efficient attacker. Again, it can power itself up. It only needs 2 energy. And it punishes your opponent for benching Pokemon. But it does have another very good use within the deck is it actually powers up your Radiant Greninja. And this deck also does play the Cross Switcher Canceling Cologne combo, which you can use with the Radiant Greninja and the Palkia to take 2 prizes and KO all the little Pokemon. So it just enables a lot of aggressive play where either your opponent is forced to play down a Manaphy or they're forced to maybe not bench as many Pokemon, which limits, how they can play the game.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So when I think about your deck, like I feel like Gholdengo's a deck that ramps, right? Like you need a lot of energy to take knockouts. So it's maybe part of the Palkia is that in the early game, it's a little bit difficult to get those big numbers with Gholdengo. So is that kind of another reason why Palkia is really good in the early game?
Yeah, that's like one of the main reasons is that you can use Palkia either using the Palkia itself or using the Greninja with the Palkia to take a 2 prize lead on your opponent where you don't have to go off with Gholdengo because yeah, even with like Earthen Vessel, it is really hard to get big knockouts with Gholdengo early on and even in like matchups against Charizard and Mew Vmax, you actually probably can't win the game by taking out 3 Charizards like with just 3 Gholdengo. You just don't have enough energy to do that a lot of the time, or it's very tricky to do that. So having like the aggression with like Palkia early on and with Greninja, it allows you to kind of buy time to kind of work towards your Gholdengo. Because once you get like, I would argue like, 5 to 6 energy in the discard pile, that's usually when the Gholdengo is like ready to come online and start like taking the big knockouts.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think another thing just to call out is like 280 HP is actually like very difficult to knock out early in the game. Like for example, Charizard, like they can't knock that out until you've taken more prize cards. Giratina, like it's very hard for them to get to 7, get those like Mirage Gates, V-Star. So yeah, I think it also just like takes hits, which I think is really nice. So yeah, because like I think a lot of people, like even myself included, when this list first came out, like the Palkia just kind of looks weird. Like it doesn't look like it's synergized with a deck. But no, hearing your explanation, like that makes a lot of sense. So I guess maybe another question I had for you is there any other water type attackers you'd consider, or no? Do you think having the Greninja and Palkia is like enough for this deck?
I think, yeah, the Greninja Palkia is like pretty good. I've seen some lists in Japan play like a Chien-Pao in the deck because you can use Shivery Chill to get energy for Gholdengo. But I mean, honestly, you don't really need it. One of the nice things, like you said about the Palkia, is it is very bulky. Both Gholdengo and Palkia actually have pretty good numbers of HP. Where if you have something like a low HP, 2 prize or like a Suicune V or a Chien-Pao in play, you kind of just like give your opponent an easy 2 prize target early on in the game, where Palkia is just very tanky. In a lot of matchups, it's hard for Palkia to get one KO'd. And even the Gholdengo kind of, is also a little bit of a thicker Pokemon. So yeah, I would argue just like the 1/1 Palkia is pretty much all you need. You don't really need to play any other water Pokemon. I guess there are like other ideas you can try, but ultimately the Palkia and Greninja are like basically the perfect package for this deck.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is you can only Star Portal once, so you can't just keep
Exactly.
stuff. So okay, cool. So another thing I just wanted to see is I noticed you played 1 of the 70 HP Gimme Ghoul. Can you kind of explain to me why you wouldn't just play 4 of the Call for Family ones?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a funny story. So this deck, I did get a lot of help and inspiration from Jarek Gamilla, who also got top 32 at Charlotte with it. And I was at like the Shuffle Squad's like Airbnb the night before, and I was gonna play this deck, and I didn't have enough Gimme Ghouls. And then I think Jarek had like a bunch of Call for Family Gimme Ghouls, and I was like, all right, just give me those. There was like I had like one Reverse Hollow 70 HP Gimme Ghoul on me, and I was like, the 70 HP Gimme Ghoul is probably better because it has an actual attack. It's got more HP. Honestly, though, I'm not gonna lie. The Call for Family Gimme Ghoul, I think, is genuinely really good in this deck. It's got a 1 retreat cost, which can actually be very beneficial. I've used its 1 retreat cost so much, and it also has Call for Family. There were so many games where my hand didn't have much going on. Like maybe I had like a nest ball and I didn't have a VIP going second. I would just like Call for Family, get something in play. Like Call for Family is just really good sometimes. If your opponent has a slow start and you have time to kind of establish a board, you can use Call for Family. And the 1 retreat cost is genuinely really good. It gives you like a cross switcher pivot. It gives you access to just moving your thing out of the active. Like if your Gimme Ghoul is being threatened, you can like retreat it into something like Greninja or Spiritomb or Manaphy or something. If you don't want it to get knocked out. And the only downside with 50 HP is it's a little bit awkward against Sableye, because obviously if you have the 50 HP Gimme Ghouls, your opponent can Sableye a lot easier, take more prizes. If you're playing against like Lost Box and you have to put Manaphy down and you have like a Gimme Ghoul in play, you weren't able to evolve it in time, they can obviously, take a 2-prize knockout with Lost Mine. But I honestly think those negatives are like perfectly fine to play the Call for Family, because the 1 retreat and the attack Call for Family genuinely do help you. The 2 retreater can be awkward sometimes. The only benefit I found with 7 HP Gimme Ghoul, and I think I would still play the 3-1 split overall, is because you can actually use continuous coin tumble or whatever it's called, to like maybe get some damage on board. Sometimes you can get like a bit of damage, like sometimes 40, even 20 damage can sometimes break the math sometimes for Gholdengo or Palkia. You can even sometimes get lucky against Roaring Moon and knock out something that like if they Frenzy Gouging you. So there's like niche scenarios where it actually comes up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And like you're a deck that's not attacking on your first turn for damage, so I think having that option to Call for Family is like really nice, like you said. Cool. One other thing I wanted to ask you too is I saw some lists they were playing the Milotic. So your deck is kind of like a combo-y deck. You're going to coin bonus. You're going to build a very large hand. Like I see here, like you don't really play Iono. You have 1 hand shuffled, the Roxanne. So did you ever consider playing the Milotic? And like maybe why did you omit it from your deck?
I think the reason the Milotic's not here is because it's really like it's not necessary, and it's also just kind of bad. It's not hard to set up, but it can be like a little awkward if you're trying to go for like a Palkia line early on. You can't commit like an Irida to like Palkia and Milotic, so it can get a little awkward in that regards. It's also like very easy to target down. If your opponent wants, they can just like counter catcher your Milotic or boss it. You do have a Super Rod, but like at that point, you don't play 2/2 Feebas. You can't just like have a Feebas on your bench ready to go if they knock out Milotic. It's also it's too much of a bait card where I can help you a little bit against hand disruption, but it's just not worth it overall, because you can like your opponent can like Sableye it. The deck doesn't play Jirachi. They can like Sableye it and stuff. It's just kind of a liability. One thing I like about this deck is like if you can make your board just like Gholdengos and Palkia and like maybe like the Greninja or whatever, it's like there's a lot of like awkward Pokemon in play against like Lost Zone decks specifically, where like even having like the Greninja in play in all the big evolutions makes it hard for the opponent to use Sableye, because like Sableye is kind of useless because they can't use Sableye to knock anything out. So the Milotic is just kind of a liability, and it's also just kind of bait in my opinion. It's not worth it. I also every time I usually get Iona to Roxanne, as long as you have Palpad or you just have Gholdengos in play, it's not that bad. The only benefit is like I guess it helps against like the Iona Roxanne path shenanigans, but honestly like it's really not that bad.
Yeah, so I think a good call you made, right? So Gholdengo, like if it's on the bench, draws 1. If it's active, draws 2. So your deck actually plays 4 copies of Worker and 4 Pokestops.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of the reason for that is Path of the Peak is like not your friend in this deck. So honestly, like you have so many outs late in the game that if you get Roxanne, you get Iono, you literally just have to draw Pokestop or Worker, and then all of a sudden you're just going to town with Gholdengo. So I personally like agree with you. I don't think Milotic's needed, just because of the way this deck is kind of set up, which I really like. So Before we move on to some more general stuff and matchups, Matt, like you just played this deck for 15 rounds. Are there any changes you'd make to the list? Any other cards you consider adding?
The only thing I'd maybe add is like another supporter. Like I don't know if that should be like another like draw three card, like an Avery, a third Irida. The original list that Jarek played was playing two Roxanne, but we found that like you don't need two Roxanne, and in fact they really wanted to play a heavy ball, so they cut the second Roxanne for the heavy ball. But yeah, really like I think the list is like pretty perfect. Like every card pulls its weight. The only thing I would maybe want to play in here, if I could actually find a card to fit, would honestly just be like another supporter. Like even like just drawing three cards can be pretty helpful. Like an Avery, even like maybe an Iono, I guess. Like just because you can like sometimes refresh your hand if it's like bad. Because this deck can tend to have like bricky hands sometimes, but ultimately I think the list is like pretty perfect, and I don't know if there's anything you can really cut.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, cool. So I think yeah, you mentioned the consistency. So like maybe if I asked you like, what would you say are some like the weaknesses of this deck?
Yeah, so one of the main weaknesses is definitely like Path of the Peak, like you said. The deck does play 8 stadium bumps, so you do have Worker, you have the Pal Pad too, technically with the Workers, and then you have the 4 Pokestops. The downside is you don't always have a way to find them. It's not like you can Irida for, you know, a Worker or Pokestop, obviously. So, because we don't play Lost Vacuum, which is a card we actually thought about playing the night before, was maybe try to play a Lost Vacuum. You can Irida for it against Path decks, but it's like when you have 8 outs in the deck, it's really not that bad. As long as you can, like, chain them, it's really not too bad. Like against Giratina, my one loss to Giratina in the tournament was mainly because in both games, I literally couldn't find a single stadium bump for like 4 turns. Like both games, he literally just went Path of the Peak turn 1, and then I like literally couldn't do anything for 4 turns. And that sometimes can happen. But all the other Giratina games were like I had the stadium bump in my hand. Obviously, a part of the plan is to just don't get rid of all your stadiums, and don't aggressively burn Pokestop and Worker against Giratina. So yeah, Path is obviously a big weakness. Another weakness is like TM Devolution. Sablezard and Rapid Strike are probably like your worst matchups. I think Rapid Strike's probably going to be closer than you think, because you can aggressively attack with Palkia. You can one-shot the Vmaxes with Gholdengo. But that matchup can be tough, obviously, with the TM Devo and the Yoga Loops when you have 50 HP Gimme Ghouls. And then obviously Sablezard, they have TM Devo, and they have the Charizard, which can be really tough to deal with. Those are your two big kind of weaknesses, are Path and TM Devo. And then I guess like the weakness itself, it can sometimes lose to itself. Again, you can get, you know, bricky hands with this deck quite often. It can happen. You can sometimes start with no VIP. You Pokestop away like 3 bad cards, and it's like, oh shoot, I guess that's it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So actually, something I was curious is if you don't know what your matchup is, like, do you pick to go first or you pick to go second?
We found that it's just best to go first with this deck. The night before, I was asking the same question. I'm like, all right, am I ever going first or second with this deck? Because we're playing Irida, stuff like that. Like, it logically would make sense to go second. You have Call for Family, but we found that just going first is optimal, going in blind, because you're a stage 1 deck at the end of the day, especially if you're trying to get, like, a turn 2 Palkia off, or you're trying to just like get Gholdengo set up as quick as possible. Because again, a lot of the time, if you get a Gholdengo in play, depending on the matchup, your Gholdengo's not getting knocked out right away. So you can kind of buy time to just kind of build up your hand a little bit with coin bonuses. So I think going first is still correct with this deck, unless you know what you're playing against. So the only matchups that I think I ever go second against are Roaring Moon. Because Roaring Moon can be scary. If you don't get a good start, they can like easily run you over with Roaring Moon, or even like the Morpeko's kind of annoying. Because you have to, like, you're forced to cross switcher around it to try to get the first 2 prizes. If you're playing against Moon, or even like Cloth, you want to go second against, ironically enough, because again, it's just any deck that can like randomly donk you super easily can be tough. I guess Miraidon you'd want to go second in. But even then, like, Miraidon is still fine to go first against. But I would argue Moon is definitely the one deck you definitely want to go second against, for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and when we get to the matchups, I'll ask you this because there's some other matchups I'm actually kind of curious about there. Okay, so we went over like maybe some of the weaknesses here. So maybe like why did you decide to play this deck? Like, give me the strengths or just like what you like about it.
So yeah, I was like gonna play Glasses Lost Box to Knoxville for the longest time, for the whole week leading up to it. And then the night before, the deck was like falling apart, and I needed something else to play. One of the people that were staying with us, Lyric Wisdom, she was playing Gholdengo, and I was watching her play against my friend PJ, and she was kind of like beating PJ with the deck. And then I was like, dude, don't make me want to play Gholdengo. Like, I wanted to play something fun, and the deck actually kind of felt decent. Like, nobody really expects it. It's kind of a good deck, in my opinion. Like, in my head, I thought it was good. Nobody knows how to play against it that well because it's still like a fresh new deck. And then Jarek and Jem Gamilla both came over to our Airbnb, and they like immediately sold me on the deck because Nathan Bishop and Lyric Wisdom were like really just like hyping the deck up. And then all of a sudden, like when they arrived and they were talking about the deck too, I was like, all right, you know what? Sell me on the deck. And then they sold me on it, and then I just immediately was like, all right, I'm sold. This deck is fun to play. And I thought it was a good call for the tournament too, because I thought there was going to be a lot of Giratina, a lot of Charizard, a lot of Rain Moon, which I think are all like fairly positive matchups. Also, Mew Vmax did just win Liverpool, so you have like a really good Mew matchup, which I'm sure we can talk about later. That was like another reason why I wanted to play it, is because it has like a good matchup spread against most of the meta. And I thought with Rapid Strike on the decline, with like Sablezard not really being popular in my opinion, I thought like the deck was like a perfectly good play.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. It reminds me a lot of Chien-Pao, not just because the attacks are similar, but it's like, in theory, you have a lot of good matchups. You just have to get your deck to set up there, and then you'll be rolling. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a really fun deck. So I think this is like, if you're trying to find a deck that's competitive and you just like really enjoy like playing Pokemon, like this might be a deck to check out. So yeah, I want to segue now, Matt, into the matchups. Like, why don't we start with Giratina, since I think this seems to be like the most popular deck, or one of the most popular decks in most tournaments. So just let's start off here. Like, is this a matchup where you would choose to go second?
I think you still want to go first against Giratina because you can immediately get the turn 2 pressure off with Palkia. If Giratina chooses to go first against you, like that's perfectly fine, because then you might have a more explosive start. Unless if you weren't going first, which is good. But yeah, the Giratina matchup's like pretty good. I think you do probably want to go first against it because again, you want to try to get your Gholdengos in play as quick as possible. You want to try to like build up towards like the Palkia Greninja play in this matchup. This is a matchup where Palkia and Greninja are very, very important.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. So let me ask you this: would you try and lead with the Palkia, or are you trying to go for that like Greninja play right away, or is it actually a matchup where like you attack with Palkia and you also attack with Greninja if you can?
A lot of the time it depends on your opponent's setup. So if your opponent only gets like one Giratina down, if you can, you go Palkia and you chase the Giratina via knock it out. However, if they get like two Giratina Vs down, you can either you can still like Palkia chase one of the Giratinas, but also you can just like go Greninja and then snipe two Comfeys off the board, and then you are basically at that point to out two Giratina Vs to win the game. So that's one way you can approach the matchup. It really depends on their board state. Like, yeah, if they have like one Giratina in play, you just always like immediately try to chase with Palkia. But if they have two Giratinas, depending on the circumstances, I think you sometimes want to just go Greninja, because then you force Giratina to have to either attack into the Greninja or gust around it. I actually did this against Michael Pramawat, where I Greninja'd two of his Comfeys, and he was forced to Lost Impact my Greninja, which was like really awkward for him. So yeah, I think like those two plays are like very valid. You either Palkia if they have one Giratina, or you can Greninja if they have two Comfeys and two Giratinas.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing is, if you're leading Palkia or even the Greninja, right, is you can have your Gholdengo like in the back ready to KO the Vstar when it comes up. So one thing exactly. I think, one weakness of Giratina is a lot of times like you're forced to attack with the Vstar, like you're giving your opponent two prizes. So if your opponent can take the lead, so in this case, if you take like a two prize lead with what you're identifying here with either the cross switch on the Giratina or you're doing the Greninja play, if you just knock out two more Giratinas with your Gholdengos, because if you knock out a Giratina with Gholdengo, they have to do it again. So I think, yeah, just getting that two prize lead and like having the Gholdengos ready in the back and leading with the Palkia and the Greninja like you're saying, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And then I guess the other thing I was just going to ask you is, how do you get ready for Roxanne Path? Like, is there, you try to thin your deck? Is it you're just like holding all your workers throughout the game, your Pokestops? Like, how do you balance like setting up, playing worker, playing Pokestop, and making sure that you don't get bricked at the end?
Yeah, like the Giratina matchup is pretty I think it's pretty simple, to be honest. Because yeah, you're basically trying to just like go 2-2-2 the entire time. Unless like you absolutely can, try not to go to three prizes before your opponent attacks the Giratina Vstar, because then you walk into the Roxanne Path and then you might be in trouble. When I played against Michael Pramawat, he was playing an Iono, which caught me off guard. So you can obviously Iono, and you don't have to use Roxanne, so it's like harder to play around. But ultimately, yeah, you try to take like the first two prizes, and yeah, just try to like play your hand down, thin your resources, try to save as many Pokestops and workers as you can. Maybe even if like what's prized, or like how many workers and Pokestops are in your deck, maybe try not to go like too aggressive with the draw, because you don't want to like fill your hand up with like a bunch of workers and Pokestops, and like if your opponent Ionos you or you get like Roxanne, it could be awkward. But yeah, definitely just holding Pokestop, holding worker, very important. You sometimes don't even want to play Pokestop in that matchup, because you sometimes Pokestop away your workers and your other Pokestops, which can be pretty bad. And if you can, before they Roxanne you, try to Palpad back workers into the deck, which is also a pretty important thing to note.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. So just to close off this matchup, is this a matchup where if you see your opponent flip over Giratina, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you just like whatever? Like how would you say you feel?
Depending on whether or not my hand has like stadium bumps in it, I'm usually pretty happy because I'm like, okay, this matchup's fine. One thing that I did want to note is Cramorant is like really bad for your opponent to use because technically it doesn't do anything for them. So the idea is if they're spitting into Palkia Vstar or Gholdengo, that damage does not matter because literally those things get one shot by Giratina. So that was one thing I was fine about the matchup is like they have to use Giratina against your Pokemon because like if they're cramming you and Sableye you, it's like it unless like they're Sableye around your bench and taking knockouts. But if your board is just a bunch of like big Pokemon and they're like spitting you or something, it's like that Cramorant damage is irrelevant because you're gonna knock me out with Giratina anyways. That 110 damage is like gone to the void basically. So that's like one funny thing about the matchup is that yeah, Cram is pretty irrelevant. I think a lot of Giratina players might make the mistake of like going, Cram against your big, Palkia and Gholdengo, and it's like, okay, who cares? Because you're going to Giratina me anyways. But yeah, I think that matchup is very good. It really depends on whether or not you actually can find stadiums. Like, even if you find one stadium bump and then they put another path down and then you can't respond to that, it gets awkward. But most of the time, I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. All right, let's move on. Let's stick with some evolution decks. I'm going to talk about Charizard next. So, true or false? Charizard's your best matchup?
True.
True. Okay, so that's good. So you mind just walking us through like why is this the best matchup?
Charizard's your best matchup because it's very easy to control the game, and it's also very easy to play around Charizard's damage. So yeah, it is. Yeah, it's definitely your best matchup by far. I played against two Charizards the entire tournament. Ironically, round 1 and round 15, and both of them are just like 2-0s.
Yeah. So I think a couple important things here. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong. So one is if you lead with Palkia, even if you take like 2 prize cards, for example, the Charizard's doing 240. So even with Defiance Band, they can't knock you out. And the same thing if you lead with Gholdengo, they can't knock it out. And again, like you have the Greninja play, which just kind of like cripples their board. So let's start there. Like, are you looking to Greninja play? Are you looking to just like hit with Palkia? Are you looking to like knock out the Rotom? Like, what are you looking for at the start of the game in this matchup?
It really depends on the board state. A lot of the time you want to go like Greninja because you can force like the one prizer in the active. You can also take out more Pokemon, so like you can then when you eventually knock out a Charizard, they might not be able to establish another Charizard because you like took out their Charmanders. If like they don't get Manaphy down, like sometimes Charizard just doesn't have it like that, and they just can't get Manaphy in play, and you can just immediately punish them and just snipe their stuff. I think both games I played against Charizard, at least one of the rounds, my opponent prized Manaphy, which was very helpful. One game, my opponent benched Radiant Charizard early on, knowing that they were against Gholdengo. And what I did, they didn't play the Manaphy down, but they grabbed Charizard. So I would just like cross switcher the Charizard, and I would just go like Greninja KO Charizard, KO Charmander, KO Mew or something, which was like another big play. But if they do get Manaphy and you can't cross switch or clone them, you can go for the Palkia and just knock out the Rotom early on and take the 2 prize lead because they can't knock out your Palkia back, right? They can't one-shot you back. So then you can you have another free turn of Palkia damage. So you can like punch the Charizard and then you need less energy to knock it out. So that's like another cool thing you can do with Palkia. Maybe if they like bench Lumineon or something after you kill the Rotom, if they have to like do that to do whatever, you can like then like maybe chase that, knock that out, and then you set the KO the Charizard for game.
Yeah, so I think this matchup, it just seems so good to me because like it's similar to Giratina where it's like they need to start attacking with Charizard EX, so like they're gonna put a 2 prizer in the active, and by that time you should have your Gholdengos ready to go, and knock them out.
Yeah.
So yeah, this matchup I think is fairly simple. Just to close it out, is this a matchup where you pick to go second, or you still want to go first to put on that pressure?
I don't think it really matters too much because at the end of the day, you're controlling their board and you're sometimes even just not attacking. Like there were games where I would literally just like if I'm not knocking out this Charizard or taking any prizes, I would just sit there, draw a bunch of cards, and then just pass. And then my opponent just punch my Gholdengo, and then I'd be like, all right, next turn, draw more cards, knock out your Charizard to do like a cross switcher play. But going first is genuinely better because this gives you a turn where Charizard doesn't attack you. If Charizard goes first and they get turn 2 Charizard, they'll take an early prize against you unless you start with Palkia V, which, a lot of the time you won't do. So I would still go first in this matchup. You don't mind if they play Rotom down either. You don't have to put Spiritomb in play right away because if anything, you want them to play the Rotom because it does give you more easy lines in a match. Because Charizard is genuinely tough to deal with 3 Charizards. Like, I don't think you can beat Charizard if they attack you with 3 Charizards, because you just don't have enough energy a lot of the time to use Gholdengo and knock 3 Zards out. You have to knock out the little Pokemon. You have to take 2 prizes where necessary. And another like key tip in this matchup is just stay on even prizes the entire game. Like, don't fall for the bait. Don't KO their active Charmander or Mew if you don't have to, because you don't need to. Just try to stay on even prizes the entire time so that they're stuck either doing 240 or they're doing, 300 damage. Don't make them do 270, because then they can one-shot your Gholdengos, and then it gets tough.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. All right, let's move on. Let's stick with evolutions. Let's go to Gardevoir here. So again, Gardevoir, is this a matchup where you're going first to put on the pressure?
100% you're going first, because you obviously need them to not have that extra turn to Mirage Step. Gardevoir is kind of a tricky matchup. I didn't play against any in the entire tournament, which was pretty lucky. But it is a scary matchup because, while you do have access to the Greninja Cologne combo, they're still going to like evenly trade against your Palkia and your Gholdengo. This is a matchup, I think, where you want to try to attack with Greninja as much as you can, if possible. Because you want to make sure that you're, taking advantage of the 1 prizer and, taking out as many Curlias. You got to get lucky. You got to obviously get the Greninja off, cologne them early on. Maybe they'll prize Manaphy. Maybe they don't get the Manaphy in play. But yeah, this is technically a scary matchup. You do have some lines, so again, you can Greninja for 2. You can try to KO a Gardevoir EX with a Gholdengo if you can. But it's tough because then they'll get to the board state like when they're playing a Charizard, they boss the Gardevoir, and then they KO you with the Shine Arcana, leave no 2 prizer in play, and it's like checkmate. So yeah, this is probably a tougher matchup. It really does come down to like, can you cripple them with Greninja?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think as someone who plays Gardevoir a lot, like I think if you go first and like you take a knockout and they Mirage Step, like if you pull off the Greninja play with Cross Switcher, like I actually think you can win, because then you're at 3, they're gonna go to like, let's say they go down to like 4. If you can Cross Switcher the Gardevoir EX, then you can win. So it does require you to play all 4 Cross Switcher or get the boss weaved in. But yeah, this seems like a matchup where it's like if Gardevoir can stabilize towards the late game, like I'd probably favor them. But if you can like put the pressure early, like I think you're probably in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's move on to some basic decks now. Like let's talk about Roaring Moon. So I think this is probably the most popular deck right now. So a couple things I have written here. So I think earlier you said you want to go second, but do you even bench Palkia in this matchup? Because I know you have the option to like lead with a 1 prizer in the active. Like, is it too risky to have a Palkia on your board?
It depends. I mean, if Moon just draws some nuts and kills your Palkia V turn 1, so be it. I think you still want to bench it because it's a great way to take a 2 prize lead on your opponent. This matchup is just who can take the first 2 prizes, obviously, because they're forced to Frenzy Gouging you, knock out your Gholdengo and Palkia with the Moon's Frenzy Gouging, which plays really nicely into your attacks. Then you can just like easily make it rain for the knockout. Palkia is just a great way to take 2 prizes. Even if like they put an Ancient Booster Capsule Moon in the active, you can't kill with Palkia. You can just like Cross Switcher or boss like Squawkabilly or Mew or something, or the Galarian Moltres, and knock it out. You can also bench Spiritomb this matchup. I think we all realize Spiritomb is really good against Moon because shutting off the Galarian Moltres is nuts. And when I was playing against Moon in the tournament, I would put the Spiritomb down, and it like is so good because it slows the Moltres down a lot, and it actually made things really awkward for them. So this is a matchup where you probably want to go Palkia. You want to get Spiritomb down. It is tricky, I guess, if you're playing against the Water Energy build, because then you're forced to bench Manaphy, which is kind of awkward. If you're playing against a build with Iron Hands, too, that might get a little tough, because if they can turn 1 hands you, I don't know if you can win the prize trade at that point. So there are, like, some awkward things, but I do think you probably want to go second, because you want to stabilize your board in this matchup, because Moon does punish you for not getting a board set up, and this matchup is all about whoever can take the first 2 prizes. Because Roy and Moon can easily take 2 prizes every time they want, you're basically going to be forced to try to get 2 prizes before they do. One other line you can take in this matchup, if you're not going to go Palkia Vstar and take a first 2 prize KO that way, a lot of the time Moon's turn 1 board is like, they'll only have 2 Roy and Moon in play, because they're going to put like Mew down, Greninja, Morpeko, Squawkabilly. They're going to have 2 Roy and Moons in play. What you can do is you can like Star Portal to the Greninja, and then you hit both Moons for 90 damage, so that if those things use Frenzy Gouging, they're going to knock themselves out, which is like a cool play you can make. So that's like one other strategy you have in this matchup. And you can also use Greninja as an attacker to knock out the Roy and Moons after they've done Frenzy Gouging if there's no Jelly or there's no Ancient Booster Capsule on them. So there are some lines you can take with the Radiant Greninja, but I definitely would bench Palkia. I guess if you're going second, it's like kind of awkward because then like the Palkia is more easy to knock out. But if you're going first, yeah, definitely just throw it down and just be like, you don't got it like that.
Yeah, I mean, they basically have to hit Catcher, and if you play Spiritomb, like they also have to hit, like they probably have to Sawda or like Double Dark Patch. So I think I agree with all that. And then just to finish here, like I think you want to finish your first turn with a one prizer in the active. So is Greninja the best one to leave in the active so that their Morpeko can't just take a knockout?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, probably would leave Greninja. Like if you have to leave the Gimmighoul in the active, it's not the end of the world. Because you can still try to go for like the Cross Switcher or the Greninja play around the Morpeko anyways the following turn. But yeah, leaving Greninja in the active is not bad because then yeah, you can sometimes force the Roaring Moon to attack you and knock you out, and then you can like try to knock that out. But I guess it could get awkward if they go like Ancient Booster Capsule Moon knock out your Greninja and then you can't respond KO that. But yeah, leaving Greninja in the active sometimes is okay. But sometimes you do value it because sometimes just drawing two cards with it is just too helpful not to waste. So I sometimes would be like, all right, I'm fine with leaving Gimmighoul in the active because I still want to be able to do concealed cards the following turn.
Yeah, you can also call for family in this matchup, which I think is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about Miraidon. I feel like a lot of what we just said applies to Miraidon as well. Since it's a very similar matchup, trading two prizers back and forth. Yeah, so Matt, like, what maybe changes in this matchup? Is like this a harder matchup because they have Iron Hands? Like, how does this one go?
It is somewhat more tricky than Roaring Moon because it's less linear. Obviously, the Spirit Tomb doesn't do as much, and yeah, the Iron Hands is really bad. If they turn one hands you and you don't KO it with either Palkia or Gholdengo, it's tough. And ideally, if they go hands, you have to go Gholdengo. You can't go Palkia because then they'll knock out Palkia, and then they'll probably be able to string together a two-prize KO down the road. So if they go Iron Hands, you just have to hope that you can KO that thing with Gholdengo because otherwise you're going to lose. And a lot of the time, if you can KO the hands with Gholdengo, they're going to struggle to Raichu you twice in a row, which is actually huge because Miraidon doesn't really have the ability to easily knock out your Gholdengo that easily. Like they can Raichu it once, but a lot of the time it's tough to do it twice. And even sometimes it's tough to do it once if you're able to like stabilize or whatever and set up a bunch of Gholdengos, even get like a Roxanne off before they can Raichu you. It's sometimes hard for them to get all those energy in play because you do have 260 HP over the 250, which is actually kind of relevant in the matchup. Yeah, Miraidon is scary. I once again didn't play against any in the entire tournament, but the idea was that yeah, if they Iron Hands you, you probably like have to go Gholdengo, respond to the Iron Hands, or even if like they go Iron Hands, you can sometimes just leave a Gholdengo in the active, and if they don't like gust around it, it's probably fine. That's one of the things I like about this deck is don't be afraid to just sit there and either poke with Make It Rain for a couple, energy, or you can just sit there and draw cards and pass. If you know that your Gholdengo is not getting KO'd and they don't have a boss, like it's perfectly fine to sometimes just pass against some of these decks because they're not knocking out your Gholdengo anyways, so you can just buy another turn, just do more stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And like, is this a matchup where you avoid Palkia? I know. Is it still one where you're okay putting that into play?
I think you're still fine to play it down. Going first, you can play it down. Going second might be a little sketchy because they can probably boss it early on or catcher it. But yeah, I don't mind putting Palkia down this matchup just because, well, it does always get knocked out. It always does take two prize cards. And if your opponent does whiff Iron Hands, you can punish them with the Palkia. So I think you still want to play it down no matter what because you can punish them for whiffing Iron Hands, which I think is really good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. All right, next up I want to talk about Mew. So you said earlier that Mew is one of your best matchups. So maybe explain why, and like, can you explain the differences between maybe like Fusion Mew and DT Mew?
Yeah, so Mew's like a great matchup because you have Spiritomb and Palkia and Gholdengo, which are just really annoying for Mew to deal with. Obviously, the Spiritomb is like just really good against Mew. We know like the Palkia Vstar Ice Rider deck is really good against Mew because of the Spiritomb. Like the Spiritomb just messes them up so much, and they have to deal with Palkia, which is a really good card against Mew because Mew has to put Pokemon in play to play the game, and Palkia punish them for doing that. So Palkia is like always doing a bajillion damage with Subspace well in that matchup. And when you combine it with Spiritomb, it makes it really tough. Mew also struggles to get through Palkia. Same thing with this deck, because instead of like having a bunch of Palkias, you have Palkia and Gholdengo. A lot of the time, Mew, I don't think can two-shot two of your Gholdengos or Palkias. Like, depending on how they, play their tablets, they're not knocking out more than one Gholdengo or Palkia in one hit, which is really, really good. Ideally, your lines can be like kind of random. You don't have to go 2-2-2. You can sometimes go like 2-3-2 or 2-3-3 if you really wanted to. Just because like the Spiritomb just does so much work. Like the Spiritomb buys you so much time in the matchup. You can just sit there and draw some cards. They'll Techno Blast you, and then you just like respond, knock them out, Make It Rain. You can like chase Genesect with Palkia. You can chase Genesect with Gholdengo. It's like a matchup where like you just have free reign to kind of just do whatever you want, which is kind of funny. If you go second, it's a little awkward because they do have time to then build up their board, which makes your Spiritomb less effective. So there are going to be some differences going first or second in this matchup. Going first is huge. If you get that Spiritomb down going first, and you can set up like Palkia and Gholdengo by turn 2, you're chilling. But going second can be a little awkward. If Mew maybe like misses like a bad turn 1, you can sometimes still punish them with Spiritomb. The fusion build is probably a little more scarier because they have the one prize threats with Meloetta and sometimes like the Ice Cube, which can be a little bit of a problem. And they have the fusion energies in higher quantity, making it harder to lock with Spiritomb. But it does make your lines easier where you can just go like 1, 2, 3 for a game. But I do think the DT build with like the double fusion energy is like your best version of Mew to play against because the Tomb puts in more work. The Palkia is more of a threat. And the Gholdengos are also like kind of tanky too.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I agree with you. I just think it's too hard for Mew to like get through all your attackers. They need 3 damage modifiers to take a knockout. So like you said, once they do one shot, like they can't do another one. So
Yep.
you have like so much time in this matchup to set up and like just get going. So yeah, I think Mew is definitely one of the good ones here.
Yeah, the only scary thing in that matchup is like judge path, I guess. Like sometimes they can judge path you into like a really bad hand, and then it's like okay, that's where things get a little sketchy. But like if they judge path you and you can draw like a worker or Pokestop, you're chilling. And sometimes they when they path themselves, they can't play the game either, so it is kind of like a cat and mouse game with path sometimes too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. All right, let's move on here. Let's talk about Lost Box. Let's start with like maybe like Sablezard, and then you can also maybe just talk about like various Lost Box stacks, like I don't know, like the Glasses one or like the Moon Hands, like just Lost Box in general. What do you think about that matchup?
Your Lost Box matchup is probably, other than Sablezard, I think they're all like fairly 50-50. They're fairly like even matchups. Depending if they play Team Devo, sometimes like you're playing against like a random like Paradox pile, and they'll have like a random Team Devo. The only Lost Box deck that plays Team Devo is always going to be the Sablezard deck. Sablezard is tough. You do have some defenses. Palkia is really good in this matchup because it's very tanky. You can use Raiding Greninja Palkia if you want also. And you also have Roxanne. Roxanne is very good against Sablezard. If they go like Charizard against you, you could just like Roxanne knock it out and be like, well, if you can't Charizard me again, I'm probably winning this game. So you do have lines against Sablezard. It is tricky because they do have Team Devo. You have 50 HP Gimme Ghouls. They can like easily set up 2 Gholdengos to be KO'd. This is a matchup where maybe you just want to be a little cautious with how many Gholdengos you play down because you don't want all your Gholdengos to just easily get KO'd. But it is a scary matchup for sure. The Glasses build is probably fine. They do have Iron Hands, which is annoying. I guess if you're playing against like Glasses box, maybe just don't put the Palkia in play. Though they don't play Mana Feast, you can still punish them with the Raiding Greninja, obviously, which is huge. But you can maybe just try to avoid putting Palkia down and just go all in on the Gholdengo because the only way they can KO the Gholdengo is really with the Roaring Moon. And you have the Roxanne too, so like you can like Roxanne KO them after they moon you or something. That's one line you can take against Glasses. So Glasses is probably fine if you just like kind of don't put Palkia down if you really don't have to. And then the Paradox builds with like Kyogre. So I did play against a couple of these in the tournament. One of my losses to them were because I literally Roxanne them into, it was like Super Raw Dark Energy Mirage Gate switch off a Flower Select to get the Roaring Moon off to knock me out, which was ridiculous. But this matchup, like if you're playing against like the Kyogre deck, hold the Manaphy obviously. Don't overbench your stuff, and just hold the Manaphy for when you're ready. Because you're not playing that many draw supporters to like reshuffle your hand, so your hand's always just gonna get big. So just like hold the Manaphy, so that you can bench it before they Kyogre you. If you're predicting it, you can hold Roxanne too if you really want to. Like if you can Roxanne them. And then, like, I think the Paradox box deck is fine for just any matchup. Like, if they're not playing Kyogre, it's, like, probably okay. They go, like, Moon against you. They do have Iron Hands, too, so maybe, like, the Glasses deck, maybe try not to play Palkia. But if you're playing against Paradox box, I would still prioritize Palkia because you can still use Greninja, which I would value a lot more in that matchup because they'll get punished more if you Greninja them. But yeah, that's probably how the Lost Box matchup goes. Just attack with Gholdengo. If they're playing Team Devo, it gets sketchy. If they're not playing Team Devo, it's probably fine. If you're playing against Kyogre and you know it, like if you're seeing them like get rid of a Recycler or a Pokestop or something, you know you're probably playing against Kyogre, like save the Manaphy and don't just like or bench it or save your Super Rod or whatever. Just kind of the idea there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the answer is just it depends on what type of Lost Box you're playing.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, next I have Cian-Pao. So I think Cian-Pao is a very similar deck to you. How do you think this matchup goes? And I know you and I played it twice on the weekend.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely whoever gets the first like 2 prize knockout wins most of the time. Also, going first is very important. This is like the one matchup where you definitely want to go first. Like if the Chien-Pao deck starts with Chien-Pao and you go first, you can just like immediately KO it if they don't like get out of the active and you're probably chilling. But if they go first, they're probably gonna get the first 2-prize KO either with like Greninja or they're just gonna like take the lead that way. So this is like a 50-50. It's really just who goes first. I will say though, I did play against your build, which did have like the Manaphy and stuff, and it was a little bit different. But when I play against Christian Moreno in the tournament, he was not playing Manaphy in his deck. So like game 3, I just won because I just Greninja'd him and he didn't get a third Frigivax down and he scooped immediately. So I guess if like you're like if somebody's gonna net deck some of the Chien-Pao lists from Knoxville that don't play Manaphy, this matchup is very good because you can use Greninja guaranteed. But if they're playing like a build with Manaphy, then it's probably a little tougher. And if they're playing your build with the Iron Hands, it also gets really scary because the Iron Hands is also a big threat against my deck too.
Yeah, I mean, actually, none of us who made day 2 with Chien-Pao, none of us played Manaphy, so when I was playing against you, I was a bit scared of it. Yeah, I think for Chien-Pao, it's a little bit more tricky for them because, like, let's say you leave a Gimme Goal in the active turn 1, like, I have to knock you out with, like, Greninja or something. I can't just leave Chien-Pao in the active, or, like, Iron Hands, ideally. So, yeah, I'd say, like, Gholdengo is probably slightly favored, but, like, yeah, going first, it's just massive in this this matchup.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm forgetting any decks. We can talk about Rapid Strikes a little bit. I think you said it's a little bit of a sketchy matchup. How do you think that one goes down?
Rapid Strike's probably just like it's gonna be tough because yeah, they can de-evolve you. This is a matchup where you probably want to just try not to over commit your gimme ghouls because they're very easy yoga loop targets. I guess like the best way to go about it is try to just like play aggressive with Palkia. Palkia is really good in this matchup. And you can use Palkia to like chase down like the 2-prizers. You can use Greninja to KO the Remoraid's too, maybe, which is also a decent option. And Gholdengo can one-shot their Vmaxes, so it really depends on how the game plays out. But you try to look for lines where you can either Greninja their Remoraids before they evolve, use Palkia Vstar to chase down their basic Vs before they become a problem, and also use Gholdengo to like just blow up a Vmax, which are all good options. You do have Manaphy too, which helps a little bit. It is going to be tricky because they have TM Devo, and with 50 HP Gimme Ghouls, it's very easy for them to use Yoga Loop.
Yeah, I think this is a matchup where you just want to put the pressure on, because like you're basically forcing them to get the Devo, all these combos, and if you just put pressure, like it's gonna be kind of hard for them. The deck kind of falls apart. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, we forgot to record Snorlax, so we're gonna go over that one quick. So Matt, how does the Snorlax matchup go? Is this a tough matchup?
Snorlax is fine if you play well, and also you don't start Manaphy. Obviously, starting Manaphy is like really bad. The matchup is usually you get Spiritomb down, so you can block Rotom. You have Greninja, which is really good because you can attack with Greninja against Mimikyu, and you can also like hit multiple Pokemon. And then you can also use Palkia in the matchup as like a really good early aggressor. You can't really use Gholdengo because to attack with Gholdengo consistently, you have to exhaust a lot of your energies and stuff. And if they're Misfortune Sistering you aggressively, it's going to be hard to use Gholdengo and take 6 prizes with it. So you probably just want to go like Palkia, Greninja, Manaphy. Or Palkia, Greninja, Spiritomb, sorry. But if they do Erica a Gimme Ghoul in play, it's not that bad because you can still use Gholdengo because Gholdengo can easily one-shot a Snorlax, but you just like can't. You have to be a little cautious with your resources because you might lose a couple retrievals. You do have Canceling Clone, which is another really important card in this matchup. If you can't go into Greninja, you can just like Cologne Subspace Well, knock out Mimikyu. I think Snorlax is actually like a favored matchup if you play it well.
Yeah, and then do you bench Spiritomb to block Rotom or no?
Yeah, I think you do. Yeah, I always did. I actually started with Spiritomb both games I played against Snorlax anyways. But I think you do just bench it because if they can't play Rotom, their deck just kind of doesn't draw cards. And you can just like pressure them with Greninja and Palkia.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, cool. Nice. Yeah. Matt, thank you so much for coming onto my channel today and like sharing your Gholdengo wisdom with me and our viewers here. So just to close it out, floor is yours. Any shout outs, whatever you want to say. Like, go for it, man.
Yeah, shout out to the Shuffle Squad and Jarek and Gem Gamilla for getting me on the deck and kind of giving me a bit of a rundown of how the deck plays and stuff, and for the list. And then, yeah, I guess shout out to my YouTube channel, Little Dark Fury, of course. If anybody hasn't subscribed to it yet, make sure to subscribe to it down below or whatever. And check out my second channel, too, and all that good stuff. And make sure you guys support Ciaran and his podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Yeah, so you heard the man there. Go make sure you check him out. I assume if you're watching this, you've seen LDF before, but if you haven't, if you somehow haven't, go make sure to give our boy a follow or subscribe, I guess, we're on YouTube. Cool. All right, that's going to finish for today. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck with all of your games out there.